to the Logitech McLaren G Challenge Grand Finals. We're going to be hopping into these races in a second, but of course we want to cover some things here at the top of the show. Once again, I am Frank, and joining me today at the desk is Blue. Blue, how are we feeling today about today's races?
Feeling pretty good, excited for some great action. We've got 16 racers lined up across 4 regions. We're going to go through 3 tracks each. I'm excited to see what ends up happening here today.
Yeah, going to be an exciting day of racing for sure, but before we get into that action, we want to give you guys a little bit of a sense of how these drivers got to the final grid. So again, this competition started back in November with our race days in-store competitions where drivers could actually qualify in-store to make it to our G Challenge Grand Finals. And then of course we had our online rivals qualifiers taking place in Forza Motorsport. Those ran throughout the year, and then those drivers qualified for our regional finals, semifinals, and now we are looking at our grand finals competitors here today. Like you mentioned, 16 drivers from each region going to be duking it out. And then with that format and prizing they will be competing in, like we said, 16 drivers across 3 races with 4 qualifying laps each and 10 racing laps. Now, prizing, this is where things get interesting and fun here today. For the entire grid, there is prize money on the line, with first place taking home $3,000, second place taking home $2,000, third $1,000, and of course down the line. Now, the real exciting thing is first place from each region is going to win that VIP Spanish GP racing experience. So while there is prize money, first place definitely the most exciting prize package available. But you know, as we get through that, we're gonna keep an eye on our first place winners, but you know, there's cars and tracks. We've got a little mix of what we're going to be seeing here today. So, Blue, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what the drivers are going to be racing and where they're going to be racing today? Yeah,
we've got a nice little tour going through kind of the legacy of McLaren, especially through the late kind of 1900s there as well. We'll start off with the 1976 M23 on the Catalunya GP. For those who don't know, this was the James Hunt car from the 2013 movie Rush. So that'll be a nice little historic throwback there for those who have their racing history down. Catalunya is going to be a nice way to start our players off as well, because it's a very well-balanced track, testing all the disciplines involved in sim racing. Moving on from that, we'll step up the power a little bit, move up to around 700-800 horsepower with that MP44 with the Honda engine inside of it on Silverstone. That's for sure going to test our drivers' maneuverability. Way more turns coming into that track. And then finally, we go to Watkins Glen, where it's all about maintaining momentum through those elongated curves, and especially so now that we step up to the P1, which is going to be pushing about 1,000 horsepower. So that's a lot for these players to work through on that final race.
Yeah, putting the challenge in G Challenge here today for our drivers with that full circuit, the full gamut of cars and tracks. So with that being said, of course, schedule for today, we're going to start off with our EMEA region, do a little brief recap of our LATAM and APAC Grand Finals, and then we'll finish off the day with our NA region. So a lot of exciting racing coming up. You won't want to go anywhere, so we're going to throw it to a brief commercial break, and then we'll be back with first race in EMEA, so stay tuned.
The Logitech G Pro Racing wheel and pedals are equally at home on desk setups or sim rigs. Here's how to get them hooked up to your desk. Place the wheel unit on your desk and attach the clamp. You don't need to over-tighten. The Pro wheel has 11 Newton meters of direct drive torque, so we recommend using a sturdy desk. The Pro pedals have a flat back edge so you can fit them up against your wall, so there's no wandering pedals under heavy braking.
right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back with your Logitech McLaren G Challenge Winter Season Grand Final. We're going to be getting into our first race here in EMEA, and we're going to take a look at our Race 1 qualifying. So in first, no surprises here, TPR Boquet setting that fastest lap time, our two-time previous G Challenge winner. And going down the grid, we have RBM Mitch in second, Cesar Miguel in third. Blue, anything you kind of see here in our qualifying to point out before we get into this first race?
Looking forward to a very tight mid-pack on this race, just looking at the qualification times right there. Miguel stands out a little bit between P3 and P4, but between P4 going all the way back to about P11, all within about a second or so of each other there with very close qualifying times, so expect some very tight races in that part of the pack in the actual race as well, in my opinion.
And getting into this first race, again, like you kind of mentioned, expecting some tight battles throughout the whole grid. And we'll see if TPR Boquet can hang on to this P1 position throughout our 10 laps here.
And away we go, folks. Lap 1 has begun now. Boquet leading the charge in pole position, but pretty much immediate pressure coming in from Mitch. He actually does pass him there for a second. Miguel's going to mess with his flow a little bit, though. That's going to force him going a little bit wide to the left on Elf. He'll hit a couple of those road markers there to slow him down, so that should secure Boquet for at least the first run around Renault here, but we'll have to see if he keeps it running deeper into the track.
Yeah, definitely seeing a lot of those positions exchanging early on. And like we kind of mentioned at the top of the show, every spot above 10th is a little bit more money with those other positions down below sharing that dollar amount. But really, every position can matter here in this season of the G Challenge. So all of these little battles that we see throughout the grid, that mid-pack, all dollar amounts associated with those. So while Boquet and Mitch are hanging on in first and second here, all those other little positions can make a big difference, both in the final standings and in the dollar amount at the end of the day.
Boquet pushing it a little wide there, going to cost him some speed as he comes around one of these final curves here on the first lap, but still able to maintain P1. Like we were saying before, a lot of shuffling there among some of our back markers as well, so still changing positions there. And like you were mentioning, that'll have some long-standing effects on our prize money as well. But a big wide swing as we come around through the final turns here, wounding up towards New Holland. Still going to leave Boquet in first, but the question now is how long is it going to stay this way if Mitch is able to bring a little bit more consistency to the table to slowly start eclipsing this lead we see at the moment.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned consistency there, because that's obviously one of the key components that has made Boquet so solid throughout these years, as Mitch is able to make that move and actually pull ahead of Boquet.
Nicely played by Mitch. Like I said, just a little bit more consistent on the turns. Unfortunately, Boquet, I think, running his way up into some of those crucial slowdown moments with a little bit too much force, just braking slightly too late, costing him those crucial milliseconds. And finally, as we rounded back around towards L for the first turn, that gave Mitch the window he needed to pass for P1, at least at this point in the race.
Yeah, and you see in those fourth and fifth positions, all very tight as well. But Mitch really trying to do his best to hang on to this one. Boquet struggling just a little bit there, a little bit shaken up, like you kind of mentioned, going through some of those turns with just a little bit too much speed, a little too heavy on the gas. But Cesar Miguel, we see Boquet exchanging spots there as Boquet does his best to work his way back up into pole.
A little slowdown there as he went into the sand. Doesn't seem to be slowing him down too much, already regaining one of the lost positions he found. I'm curious to see if he's going to be able to speed all the way back up to P2 to re-challenge Mitch again, but Barcode definitely no one to be trifled with here as well. He's bringing a lot of speed to the table right now, and Boquet might have himself a bit more of a challenge, which, to be fair, this is great news for Mitch, as you can already see, giving him all this freedom to roam around the track here in these final curves. Should give him a nice, healthy lead to work with for at least the next few laps while Boquet works on working his way back into P2.
Yeah, Boquet is starting to close the gap here on Barcode, but like you mentioned, Mitch kind of thankfully letting these two battle it out, as Boquet was able to take that position there. Now sights for him on P1 as he tries to find some speed to work his way back up to start to battle again with Mitch.
Obviously, considering, again, he's been our former champion before. We somewhat expect this type of performance out of him, but it's still impressive nonetheless to have a slip-up like that, winding all the way up in the sand, and then bringing back those 2 positions seemingly effortlessly just 1 lap later, already back in P2. So definitely our contender that we've been seeing in the last few seasons as well. Down in the midfield, though, a few more exchanges still happening there, with Johan taking over P9 away from Gatillo in P10. So still a lot of action going on there in the mid-pack. And it's at this key point in the race, too. This is the thing to pay attention to on Catalunya. It's really this first third or so of the track, finishing things up as we get up to this turn right here on Worth, where, in my opinion, things get a little bit easier for these players to navigate. That's where they can really gain some time, but they've got to be careful in that first section there, as that's definitely where we're going to see some overtaking, and really have been already just in these first 3 laps.
Yeah, lots of positions being exchanged, but like you kind of alluded to, that racing getting a little bit cleaner as our race kind of goes on. Now it's just a matter of whether Mitch can hold on to this lead, and if Boquet can find some extra time to potentially make that overtake. But you see Barcode there hanging on to P3, and some other shout outs like Kaiser Miguel, Raptors in 5th and 6th, performing extremely well, been exchanging some positions. Matt Williams as well, trying to work his way up to battle it out, trying to inch every position they can out of this race, because like we mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to be going through 3 races here today with those point values, additional points, single point being awarded for the fastest laps. So, you know, while Boquet might finish in 2nd here, trying to battle his way back up with Mitch, if he doesn't find that position, there's other ways throughout the race to kind of make some of those things up. And, you know, that kind of applies throughout the rest of the grid. So we'll have to see how things shake out. But I know one thing about Boquet, after having spoke with him after previous championship wins, is that, you know, he always has his eyes set out for first place, really wants to make a name for himself, kind of leave that Forza legacy alongside him, be associated with being one of the fastest. So while this is the first time we've kind of seen him in that P2, I definitely expect his mental to be just as strong in continuing to battle throughout today's races, as we see Matt Williams climbing up some positions there as the rest of the grid shuffles behind him.
Johan going a little too wide there on an interesting spot on the track as well. It ends up costing him big, about 4 or 5 positions lost as a result of that one, with some more shifts still happening there towards the front of the pack as well. Quinton Gen Raptors seem to be going back at it. They've changed positions 2 or 3 times, it seems, just in the last lap alone. So like I said before, as we drop down below P3, that 4th through, you know, really like 8th position still seems to be relatively close contended at this point. But at the moment, we are still seeing Boquet continuing to close the gap against Mitch, and he's still got about half the race to actually retake P1, so that's still absolutely in the cards for him as well. We've been seeing that leader time, the interval there on the top left, steadily decreasing. It started out at about 1.5 when he lost P2 a couple of laps back, but you can see he shrunk it considerably by about 1/3 of that full time already.
Yeah, and keep in mind, he climbed his way all the way back up into 2nd as well. You know, after flirting with the dirt a little bit there, has really tightened it up. So love to see it as, yeah, he continues to shrink that lead down. And yeah, he was our first place in qualifying as well. So, you know, the pace is there for him. It's just whether or not he can keep it clean throughout the second half of this race. But, you know, Barcode, a little bit of distance behind him, and the field starts to separate a little bit through there, but we have Quinton, you know, on the heels there, Raptors as well, all fighting for those additional placements as there's a move made. Quinton going to be working his way up. Boquet still trying to cut down this lead, and, you know, again, money on the line here for every position. So these battles from Quinton, Kaiser, Raptors, Williams, all kind of have that dollar amount associated with them. So love seeing all of these racers continue to battle throughout the course of the race here.
Quinton and Miguel seem to be the real story right now in terms of close contenders at this point. They've been neck and neck for the past few laps, it seems, at least right there. You can see only a 0.3 second lead so far for Quinton, so he's fighting hard to try and hold on to that position. And unfortunately, it has created a gap to try and move him further up than that. 5 seconds still between him and Barcode, but still makes for compelling racing for those two. And as we saw on the prize graphic, quite a bit of money to be won there as one of us hits the braking indicators coming up here on L for the start of lap 6.
No slowing down as we reach towards the final laps here of our first race. Rest of the grid coming through as even the P11 continues to climb throughout that leaderboard. Boquet now trying to close this gap on Mitch. Can a move be made here? We'll have to see if he can find it.
So this is where the pressing issue for Boquet that we saw earlier in the race will be brought up once again. Can he control his pacing coming around these pivotal turns like right here as we come out of Seat, working our way up towards Worth as well? Is he going to be able to get that slowdown pacing that he needs? But he'll continue to push it a little slippy there as he goes back around, working his way up towards camp. So he wants that P1, and he's willing to risk, at the very least, his tires in the process of doing that by trying to gain a couple of extra milliseconds here to catch up to P1.
Yeah, Boquet trying to sniff out the move here, going into this turn, looking for a line, like you mentioned, a little bit shaky before, but is trying to keep things under wraps, applying that pressure to Mitch. Mitch doing a great job of defending, almost maybe shocked that Boquet worked his way all the way back into this position, continuing to fight for it as Boquet tries to sniff out that first place.
Nice line by Mitch there. We'll see if he's going to be able to keep up this speed or not. We saw a very interesting one taken by Boquet as well, and he's still sitting right behind it. I think he drops back by a couple of feet here, however. So this is the pivotal juncture right here, and he's going to dive for it at the moment. Looks like Boquet going to try to work his way on the inside of Elf to see if he can take it, but no. Mitch goes wide again, but Boquet going to bully out his opponent a little bit here. Momentarily, at the very least, is going to retake P1. They'll go back and forth for it here on the 7th lap. Boquet continuing to press it once again, and now really just trying to press Mitch out of the track entirely here, but no, goes into the grass. That's going to cost him a bit as we come back around Repsol, but he's still holding on here. Mitch as well, just not able to keep his speed up as we come through the exits of these pivotal turns. One more big moment right here, but it seems, at least for the time being, that Mitch is going to cede P1 over to Boquet as he pushes ahead coming up on Worth.
An incredible move by Boquet. The resilience out of both of those drivers on lap 7. Mitch still right on those heels, though, looking to take P1 back from that hard-fought battle by Boquet. Will the move be able to be made here? Both of those players just flirting with it for the time being. We've seen Boquet on offense, and now we'll have a chance to see how he is on defense as Mitch continues to press the issue.
There's a lesson here to potentially be learned by Mitch, and he's only got 3 laps to adjust on it as well. He's noticed now that Boquet is playing very aggressively for track control, not ceding over those inner lanes when he wants to make a pass, and even risking contact in those situations. So that's going to be the strategy now for Mitch. Is he willing to get as aggressive as we've seen Boquet shift himself into here over these past few laps? That's what's going to be necessary in order to pass. He'll have to take a few risks. Could cost him big, of course, if things go completely awry on a big turn like we have coming up right here. But no, once again, Boquet just not giving him the space he needs to progress back into P1 at this point. Still 2 laps to go, though, so it's not over yet. And Mitch, once again, bringing it very close as we work our way up through the big speed gain here on Renault. And we'll see if he's once again getting an opportunity to pass as we come up onto Repsol.
Mitch trying to find the inside, trying to find the outside, trying to find any opening against Boquet here. And Barcode just happy to let this battle play out and hold on to that 3rd position as these two continue to go at it turn after turn. Boquet hard fought back into P1, but Mitch not really giving him any moment to take a breather since that position was earned back for him. In lap 8 now, as these two continue to duke it out. Mitch now trying to just hold on. Boquet again trying to control that track, and both of these drivers looking so clean in these final laps here on Catalunya.
Little wobbly there for Mitch, and I don't blame him too. Boquet's been going all over the track here. It's not very easy for Mitch to try and decide. Does he try and push the inside or outside lane here? Boquet is not making himself predictable in any sense. But however, Boquet slipping just a little bit here as we come up on lap 9. This is the big straight, goes pretty much the full length of the rest of the track here. So that's going to be an opportunity for Mitch to carve ahead once again. But once more, Boquet's been aggressive here on the first turn at Elf. Is he going to be able to use this to take it over? No, Mitch finally getting aggressive himself, slaps traps himself on the inside, denies what would have been a very aggressive exit from turn 1 for Boquet that could have allowed him to retake P1. Nice defensive maneuvering there from Mitch. He's now going to retake the lead yet again here coming into the final 2 laps of the race.
These two just continuing to battle back and forth is probably one of the most exciting battles we've seen in the G Challenge on Forza, as they continue to trade blows, with Mitch currently coming out on top. And like you had kind of mentioned, Blue, just that little bit of slippage from Boquet gave Mitch just the opening he needed to gain the lead on that straight. Boquet, though, managing to find another opening and reclaims a P1.
It's getting really bumper car-y here between these two as well in the final couple of laps. Mitch now realizing he's going to have to fight for his pole position if he wants to win out this race, but Boquet continuing to maintain it for now, denying as much of that presence as possible here on these pivotal turns as we work our way down Banc Sabadell to try and push our way towards those final few turns. There should be another opportunity here, as we've also seen Boquet slip a little bit on this final turn at New Holland. That's a pivotal moment where you need to pick up as much speed as possible. So if that happens again, we could potentially see Mitch take over once again, just like he did on the last lap.
Yep, and as we saw, some other intense battles still going on throughout the grid, but this one continues to go back and forth as Mitch looks to reclaim that lead. Little bit of dust kicked up and around this corner. Mitch with the overtake. Now can he hold on to first as Boquet tries to find another line throughout the next corner? As we're in our final lap, it's tough to predict who's going to come out on top here.
Mitch, though, still again with some great work. He has found the quote-unquote counter to Boquet on turn 1 over by Elf there in denying him that aggressive exit that he's used at least once to pass Mitch over the course of this track here. But Boquet still finding some ways to work himself back into P1 through Repsol there. The battle continuing to work its way into seat. Mitch takes over once again here, coming up onto Worth. A big turn after that coming in from Campsa as well. Mitch could truly gain some pacing here, and it looks like he might just very well do that. The slightly more consistent driving that we've seen out of him could end up keeping him in P1 for this final stretch of the race here as we come back around for the final few seconds of our first race of the series.
Yeah, Mitch just staying so clean in those pivotal moments kind of gives him just the edge when he needs to over Boquet. Boquet now losing a little bit of pace there behind Mitch on our final lap.
And I think, unfortunately, that little slip we saw a couple of turns back from Boquet, that's going to seal it here for race number 1. Gives Mitch a healthy gap to cross the finish line with, and he's going to take P1 here, coming out of Catalunya for the first race here of our grand finals.
Yeah, and there we see the 2-time former G Challenge champion Boquet finishing in second in our first race here of the grand final. And while he did manage to claw his way back into first several times throughout that race, Mitch looking very clean, and maybe just a little bit of endurance on Boquet's part, having to battle so hard throughout the race, playing a factor there. But overall, that grid kind of looking very interesting. Raptors jumping up 3 positions as well. Matt Williams jumping up 5. A lot of movement in our final results of race 1.
Some great consistency coming out of players like Barcode. I'm curious to see as well as we move into our second and third races. We'll have a few more turns, a few more opportunities, I think, in my opinion, for passing potentially these P1 and P2 positions for Barcode. So I'm curious to see if he gets another edge up here as we move deeper into the series as well.
Yeah, well, it looks like EMEA, I'm so excited, I can't even speak, is going to be another exciting region here with that battle we saw between Boquet and Mitch. So we're going to throw it to a brief commercial break, and then we'll be right back with race number 2. Stay tuned.
The Logitech G Pro Racing wheel and pedals are equally at home on desk setups or sim rigs. Here's how to get them hooked up to your desk. Place the wheel unit on your desk and attach the clamp. You don't need to over-tighten. The Pro wheel has 11 Newton meters of direct drive torque, so we recommend using a sturdy desk. The Pro pedals have a flat back edge so you can fit them up against your wall, so there's no wandering pedals under heavy braking.
right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your Logitech McLaren G Challenge Winter Grand Final. We just saw a very exciting race one in our EMEA region, and we're going to get ready to get into race two here. So taking a look at our qualifying for race number two, we have RBM Mitch finishing in first, ESV Barcode finishing in second, and then TPR Bouquet finishing in third. So a little bit of a shakeup there, but Blue, what do you think of our qualifying going into race two?
Well, effectively an immediate answer to that question I phrased at the end of race one, and if we were going to see Barcode have a little bit more of an increased performance this time, already contending for top two here at the start. Bouquet, I'm curious to see how he does in the actual race here as well. We mentioned that he was potentially mismanaging the turns a little bit back in race number one, and obviously moving over to Silverstone here for race two, there are quite a few turns on this track, and ones that slow you down quite heavily as well. So I'm curious to see if that's why we saw him have a slightly slower time and P3 start this time around, and if we're going to see any reflection of that in the race. That mid-pack as well, still very tight. Expect a lot of action in the race among those racers.
Yeah, I've definitely got my eyes on some of that mid-pack as well. We saw Raptors and Miguel jumping up those spots on the leaderboard of the previous race, and here they are finishing in 6th and 7th. So we'll have to monitor their climb, see if they continue to rise up. But yeah, excited to get into our second race and see how the grid shakes out. So again, we'll have RBM Mitch starting in pole position, and now it's really just going to be a matter of if he can hold on to that lead throughout this race and whether or not Bouquet can continue to battle back despite all these turns here on Silverstone.
We'll see if things get messy here. We've got a pretty fast first curve to start things out on Silverstone, so we shouldn't see a jumble up there. It's not until we approach the village coming up here soon where we're going to have that first point of contention. How will Mitch handle it? Does anyone go for the dive on him here? Bouquet, by the way, already retaking P2 away from Barcode. Barcode clearly not happy about that as he tries to swing around the loop here. Unfortunately, ends up getting cut off by Bouquet. Still seeing that aggression from race one, alive and well in his play style now as we move to Silverstone. Obviously, again, we haven't talked about the car yet, but a bit of a step up in power here as well. So coming off of these straightaways, you're going to have a little bit more forgiveness in getting back to your full power this time in comparison to our last race where we had the James Hunt car.
Yeah, and really the real winner between that battle between Bouquet and Barcode seems to be Mitch, as he's able to establish that lead with a bit of a cushion in first place. But of course, in race number one, we saw Bouquet able to make up the distance and start to contest that position as well. Lots of other shakeups happening throughout the field, even between P12 and 13. There's some adjustments being made. We have some of those notable drivers, Matt Williams hanging on to P10 right now, Raptors sitting right around P7, Kaiser Miguel also working his way up the leaderboard as we see Matt Williams making a little climb there up to P9, and Bouquet trying to battle it out between first and third right now as he's having to try to both attack and defend against these two drivers.
A tough position for sure to him to be inside of. Barcode seeming to drop off a little bit here as we start to round back around for our second lap. We'll keep an eye on that one, of course, with some other players still sitting close behind. Barcode again utilizing the relatively slower nature of the village portion of this track that we're going through right now here, really trying to push hard as we transition from that into the loop and then swing out through our final turn in that area as well here, but just not able to capitalize on it fully yet. However, look at the exit that Bouquet got coming out from that last turn, right on the heels of Mitch. Just doesn't really have an angle to swing wide for, as he unfortunately would open himself up too heavily to a move from Barcode. So it opts to play defensively this time around. Works out for him, and it's a good thing too, because you can see Barcode there itching to swing right behind him, just a couple feet behind.
Yeah, Barcode looking to make that move, and Mitch doing a great job of defending as well, as Bouquet also looking a little bit more stable here on this race, despite all this pressure from behind that Barcode is applying. And the rest of that field kind of stable for the time being, as all the heat seems to be here in our pole positions. But here comes Boquet. Can he find the exit? No, and is actually going to drop back behind Barcode as a result of that move.
That's exactly what I mentioned him being worried about on an earlier part of this lap too, not wanting to go too wide, make a move, and if it doesn't go his way, leaves himself open to an overtake from Barcode. What do we see happen here now coming around one of the final turns on lap 2? The exact scenario plays out, and Barcode, he's just going to keep it going, already challenging for Mitch, goes for a tight curve here on the first turn, and he's actually going to be able to take P1, but look at this triple wide. Now Boquet getting right into it here as we approach the loop, not letting anyone get away from his P2 there, but he'll still end up getting bounced back P3. Boquet actually seems like it got knocked off a bit there, back down to P4 even, so that's going to continue to be a tight race in this mid-pack as we focus on that for a second. Also very close between quite a few of these racers right now.
Yeah, we see a lot of battles happening in those tough positions. Barcode, though, manages to find P1. Mitch also behind by a decent chunk of time, so he'll have to battle his way back up. Boquet, again, also now trying to climb his way into those higher positions as this battle between first, second, and third continues to wage on. We've got our other kind of notable drivers here, Raptors, Kaiser Miguel, Matt Williams, ZR Villa, all kind of hanging out in that mid-pack as these clusters continue to duke it out. Mitch now just looking to regain some of the track here on Barcode. Boquet as well, trying to just tighten this one up so that moves can be made. As for the time being, some of this dust has a brief chance to settle before perhaps another battle emerges early on here on Silverstone.
We can see again that P7 through roughly P11 position being tightly contested for. This time it's Villa kind of leading that pack, where I believe it was Matt Williams doing most of the leading there in the last race. Very defensive positioning being taken by whoever is in front of that, so that's going to frustrate some of those drivers directly behind that as they're just not able to work their way towards it. You can see there as we were looking at Mitch, there's been a bit of contact throughout the course of this race too. I think he ended up bumping Barcoder Mitch at one point earlier on this track here, so these racers once again fighting heavily for those positions, especially in that first major turn over there towards the village too.
Yep, position's kind of steady here for the time being, but undoubtedly we'll see some of these drivers catch up. A little wobbly there from Mitch, but trying to gain some time, be able to contest Barcode for that P1 position. Boquet as well, just trying to clean things up here in race number 2 on Silverstone. And Boquet, you know, this is maybe a real test of his driving as well, because typically we've seen him, you know, sitting quite comfortably in P1, out ahead of the pack, really relying on his individual speed. And while he certainly, you know, had some battles, this is probably one of the hardest tests we've seen for him in terms of just skill as a driver. These tracks, these new racers really throwing everything at him, and we'll really see what he has here. There's another cluster towards the back of the pack, dukes it out. Everyone fighting for position here again, because above P10, each individual place earns a little bit more cash. So, you know, these battles kind of intense in every position out here on the grid.
You could see an example of what we were talking about there before as well. That was our P7 through P11 pack right there. Matt Williams trying to fight hard for leading position, but just squirms a little bit too much, drifts off into the sand, and he quickly ghosts himself out to avoid tripping up the rest of the pack there. They're going to push past him. We'll see him drop down to P11 for now. And now it's up to Villa once again to see if he can continue to push forward as the leader of that section of the grid right now.
Yep. And 1, 2, and 3, these intervals being cut down as Boquet slowly starts to creep his way up towards Mitch, trying to find room to make a move through these turns. See if he can just set himself up to climb his way up that leaderboard. Again, you know, an additional race after this one, but after Boquet finished in second, obviously doesn't want to give any room for error when it comes to those point totals. Fastest lap again awarding that additional point, but Boquet, kind of atypical in terms of performance from what we've seen out of him, but we know his skill as a driver. We know what he is capable of. It's just about him kind of making those opportunities for himself. But Mitch and Barcode putting on a show as well for us here today as those positions continue to jockey back and forth. Kaiser Miguel also making a move above Raptors there as all of these individual little battles seem to be heating up.
A risky move there from Mitch to try and overtake where he did over, I believe, by the farm curve. Ends up working out, but if he had gotten cut off, that could have had major ramifications for him, potentially pushing him back behind Boquet. But he aces it, takes control. Barcode, I suppose, either didn't see it coming or just kind of let it happen. And as a result, Mitch now retakes P1, is going to shoot ahead here, heading through lap 6. Barcode, at the moment, no way to immediately contest that. And looking at the track Formula 2, probably not going to see an opportunity for that until at least we round back around towards the front once again and start lap 7 here. So nice place from Mitch, keeping it consistent, and more importantly than anything else, keeping himself in front of the pack here. But as you can see, Barcode not too far behind as we navigate our way through, I believe that was just Maggots who went through a second ago too. Very, very tough portion of the track. Lots of maneuvering at high speeds that can trip up our drivers if they're having to also pay attention to, well, this Barcode making another pass attempt. He has to go a bit wide there and still not enough power because he got forced so wide. Mitch holds on, bullies Barcode nearly into the grass right there as we come back around the final curve here on Club, heading up through the Hamilton Straight.
Yep, Barcode being forced to kind of get in line there by some great driving out of Mitch. And I think the second part of what you kind of mentioned, one is the consistency we've seen out of Mitch here making a big difference, but also the patience. I feel like in that first race, we kind of saw Boquet maybe at times that driving style feeling a little bit impatient, maybe trying to force a move when it wasn't there, and perhaps sometime costing him some time. But Mitch seemingly just kind of waiting for the opportunity to strike and staying consistent while also being patient has allowed him to work his way back into P1 and put the pressure on both Boquet and Barcode to find another move, another opening, or an opportunity here.
A little bit of development going on in our mid-pack there as well. For just a moment, we saw Brulaire finally able to challenge out Villa. Brulaire was actually one of our highlight players coming from the Play Days event that we did at the in-store activation as well. He was one of our top players from that and is competing quite nicely here in the grand finals as well, but still struggling. Looks like he succeeded again in getting past Villa, trying to break away from that mid-pack that's been jammed up for pretty much the whole race at this point.
Yeah, and that's super exciting to see right throughout, this competition. We kind of talked about it at the beginning, but there's ways to even qualify for this in store. So there's both online qualifying through the Forza Rivals playlist as Boquet applies some pressure there, but is forced to back off ever so slightly. And then, yeah, you can qualify in person in one of our stores through those race days activations, which are now taking place, across the globe, really. And of course, you can check out the LogitechGChallenge.com website to see where those might be taking place. But yeah, really awesome to see one of those in-store, in-person qualifiers performing so well in the grand finals here. But the story continues as P1, 2, and 3 battle out. Boquet just trying to find one of these opportunities as we near the final few laps of our second race. Not too much movement here as Mitch has managed to hold steady in first. Barcode continues to squirm for that P1, and Boquet really just kind of letting them battle it out, trying to find perhaps a move that can be made from one of these perhaps forced errors that might be coming out of either Mitch or Barcode.
Yeah, given his aggressive play style, this might be a nice shift for him and kind of like, let me hang back. Let's see if these guys make a mistake, and then if so, I'll capitalize on that then. Obviously very risky. There is quite a bit of validity in his strategy of like, man, I'm just going to whip it into these corners here, bar none the risk of potentially spinning out that we're seeing from him a couple of times here. It's only 10 laps these races are, so that's very much hot or not style of racing. So absolutely see the justification for his play style, but at the moment just really struggling to close that final gap, coming up on some slower turns here as we round about towards lap 9 in a second, and he'll get another chance to do so as we work our way up towards the village. Very curious to see if he can finally capitalize on this and move beyond P3 as Barcode still fighting heavily against Mitch for P1. P1 as well. They've been neck and neck for quite some time now.
Yeah, Mitch definitely being, tested here as well. All of these three positions having to show us really everything they've got, whether it's overtakes, defending, finding those openings, really kind of the full gamut of racing on display here. So really exciting to see a great show being put on for us here from these three drivers. Of course, action happening in the mid-pack as our race days qualifier continues to claw his way up the leaderboard. And Boquet still trying to find some moves here. Barcode maybe flirting with the grass just a bit, but manages to hold on, and these three still holding their positions.
Another nice move from Brulaire that we got to see a few seconds back there. That was our bright yellow livery, as he was once again able to work his way past Villa, give himself a little bit more of an opening to try and work up towards P6. Given the amount of laps we have left, probably not going to see that challenge come to fruition unless there's a mistake from Raptors ahead of him. But still impressive passing, given he's trying to fight his way out of that mid-pack. It's been jammed up for quite some time. Mitch, though, still the key of consistency here as we round our way forward. But it looks like Barcode lost quite a bit of momentum coming out of Maggots a couple of seconds ago. That's going to finally cost him P2 as Boquet now back in control of that top placement yet again.
Yeah, and a huge opening for Boquet here. If he can hold on to this P2 position, it really might make a difference going into that final race. When the final points are tallied, we will have to see where the dust settles there. But Mitch being so quick and so consistent, it's really going to test Boquet and what he can pull off there. Matt Williams, again, another driver we've seen throughout the EMEA region, putting on a good defense against those other drivers. And Boquet here still managing to hold on to P2 as we close out this second race.
Big turns coming up here as well as these players try to capitalize on their final opportunities to pass. Coming into the final straights here at lap 10, Mitch still far ahead of Boquet, not looking like we're going to be able to see him close that gap necessarily, but the mid-pack still very much up in the air. Matt Williams, again, who we saw fall back a little bit earlier in this race due to some slightly over-aggressive driving, trying to control the mid-pack there. He'll at least be able to work his way past Johan. Johan with just a courtesy ghost to make sure he doesn't mess up his obviously proponent there just behind him, so he'll continue to move past that, at least reclaim one more position. But as we're coming around towards those final two turns or so outside of Maggots, it is still Mitch leading the charge here in P1. And unless there's a major mistake made here or a heroic act of racing out of Boquet or Barcode, it is looking like once again Mitch is going to be able to claim P1 for the second time here in this series.
Yeah, just great stuff that we've seen out of RBM Mitch throughout our first two races. Again, like you mentioned, that consistency and that patience as well. Just not really trying to force the issue, waiting for those opportunities to arise, and then driving extremely clean throughout the race as Boquet finishes P2. Barcode as well. We saw some great things out of him throughout this second race, but really Boquet with the nice overtake finishing P2. But all three of these drivers really making for a great grand finals in our EMEA region.
Absolutely very competitive, especially among our top two as well there. And as you mentioned, that third place finish, just losing a little bit too much speed on the final lap. Oftentimes sim racing is a test of a player's consistency, and that's where we saw it fall off. Boquet just waiting for that opportunity, and he finally got it to at least reclaim his P2 finish.
Yeah, and with the way that final grid kind of shook out with Mitch in first, Boquet in second, Barcode there, that main battle. But we have, names like Kaiser Miguel, Quinton, Raptors, Villa, kind of the usual suspects of that mid-pack, all still battling for those positions. Like we kind of mentioned, P10 and above each have an incremental increase in dollar amount. So each one of those positions, getting you a little bit more at the end of the day. But of course, the big grand prize, that first place finish after our upcoming race, is also going to win that VIP race experience. So with race 2 in the books, we are going to throw it to a brief commercial break, and then we'll be back with our final race of the EMEA region. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
The Logitech G Pro Racing wheel and pedals are equally at home on desk setups or sim rigs. Here's how to get them hooked up to your desk. Place the wheel unit on your desk and attach the clamp. You don't need to over tighten. The Pro wheel has 11 Newton meters of direct drive torque, so we recommend using a sturdy desk. The Pro pedals have a flat back edge so you can fit them up against your wall, so there's no wandering pedals under heavy braking.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your Logitech McLaren G Challenge Grand Final. We're taking a look at our EMEA region. We've got one race left before we crown a winner. And Blue, it's been an exciting couple of races so far, so definitely looking forward to race 3. We've got Boquet back on top of our qualifying laps with Mitch in second, Barcode in third as they continue to battle it out. But what are your thoughts going into our final race here?
I'm excited to see what Boquet's able to do here, right? Because I think the track favors him quite heavily, the car favors him quite heavily too. Just like our former race, it's another little step up in horsepower, flirting with about 1,000 or so now, going over to the P1, but still very much the same type of driving, just given where the origins of the P1 came from. The track as well, a lot of emphasis here is going to be on maintaining your speed around the corners, but they're nowhere near as harsh as we saw on our first two tracks. I think that's going to give Boquet a little bit more power. Will it be enough to contest for the actual championship here? That's now the question, though, as Mitch has been pretty much the key of, has been the picture of consistency throughout these two races previously.
Yeah, going to be exciting. And again, some of our familiar faces, Kaiser, Brulaire, Raptors, all kind of working their way up, continuing to improve race after race. So I'm sure it's going to be an exciting third race here for our grand final. I think this car, especially really starts to lean towards Boquet's comfort zone. Now it'll just be a question of how does the rest of the grid fall in line to see who is going to be our EMEA G Challenge champion.
We're going to go wide here to start as we come around our first turn on the 90. Mitch already trying to get right into the face of his opponent to try and contest for P1. Won't be successful in it just yet. Like I said before, a lot of power coming out of these P1s now, so players do have to be careful on exiting their turns to make sure they don't give it too much, end up spinning out here a little bit too. You can see him flirting with the dirt a bit as they start to work their way through some of the trickier sections of this track, that one being an example of it right there, the inner loop or the bus stop as it's sometimes called. A real check here to make sure our drivers are paying attention before they enter the later part of the track that we're coming down to now, called the boot, for kind of obvious reasons if you look at the map there on the top right.
Yeah, and really, taking a look at our timing tower, I just love what we're seeing, right? Even, though our P1, 2, and 3 is kind of what we've seen in our previous races. Love the performance. It's Brulaire sitting in P4, Kaiser, Miguel, P5, Villa in 6th, Raptors in 7th. So again, just consistency being rewarded throughout our EMEA region as those drivers continue to perform better and better track after track. But of course, the real story here is crowning a champion. Will Boquet have what it takes to earn enough points in this final race with P1, perhaps a fastest lap, but even more so, Mitch's consistency? Will he place in a way that allows Boquet to claim his third championship in a row? Or will Mitch have something to say about that here today?
It's looking good for Boquet right now, coming out of lap number 1. Smooth, consistent driving, but the same can be said for Mitch. So it's all going to be in keeping that going as we move deeper and deeper into this race right here. Another thing to note, too, much shorter track in terms of the overall width that we're working with here. So track limits are very important to pay attention to, especially as you get within close contention of another racer here. You don't want to be pushing that too far, ending up penalizing yourself, which could cost you bigly at the end of the race if you're in a close contention with someone else.
Yeah, Boquet still sitting in first. Mitch in second. And really, you know, if you're Boquet, you're probably the biggest fan of Barcode here. You're really rooting for him to overtake Mitch and try to get him out of the top 3 to give yourself really the best chance at a W here today. Raptors, of course, also clawing his way up through the ranks. Mitch continuing to hang on. Little dust being kicked up here as P1, 2, and 3 start to space out. More breathing room for Boquet, but more breathing room for Mitch as well, who was probably content just to sit in P2 at this point and defend that P2 like it was his P1. And those track limits perhaps coming into effect there as a bit of a cluster going in through those previous turns starts to even out now at the back of our pack. But, you know, lots of action going on through Watkins Glen here today.
We can see here, I think this is Johan, indeed it is, trying to battle back for the position he just lost over there towards the toe of the boot. Went a little bit too wide there, whipped the car just a sliver of an amount, and unfortunately ends up costing him that first position that he was in. He'll fall back, has not been able to reclaim that as of yet, but as we focus more on the front runners yet again here, Boquet still leading the charge and actually gaining time over Mitch here as we round our way through into lap 3. Mitch needing to see a little bit more of an improvement for him, but important to note, he still has those nice, safe victories from the first 2 tracks, so the incentivization to push for an outright P1 finish here, not as strong for him as it is for Boquet.
Yeah, doesn't have to take as many risks here in this third and final race, which is probably a nice, mental clarity, mental moment for Mitch there, as Boquet not only has to hold on to P1, but hope that there's some overtakes in P2 and P3 to really start to open the door for him to finish in first at the end of our 3 races. Mitch continuing just to hold steady here, stays consistent, and yeah, there's some decent space here between Boquet, Mitch, and Barcode, with things tightening up in our 4th, 5th, and 6th positions.
This player's getting a little bit slippy. You do have to give some credit to Brulaire, who's actually had another improvement over the previous maps as well here. He's all the way up to P4 now, so a nice play from him. But important to note, as we saw about a minute or so ago, Miguel right on his heels there, only 0.2 seconds behind roughly. So Brulaire having to fight pretty heavily for that. We did see him slipping a bit on those turns, so that's a big question if he's going to be able to maintain P4 or potentially push further than that to challenge Barcode, as he too is hanging quite a bit back from Mitch at this point. So it'll be tough for him to try and move forward and challenge for P2 at this stage.
Yep, Raptors and Villa also exchanging positions there right behind Kaiser. Lots of battles going back and forth as our drivers looking more and more comfortable here as the day progresses. Mitch still holding steady in P2. Barcode again dropping back. Kaiser and Brulaire exchanging positions as Kaiser really kind of been right there, right outside of podium, but still some great performances from our mid-pack here today, despite all the speed and battling we've seen out of our top 3 so far.
That storyline is really going to continue here as we race around. Like I was saying before, this track, more so than anything, is about maintaining as much speed as possible through the curves, especially with a high-powered car like the P1 here. That boot is going to be a great area to try and retake some control as you can capitalize on those poor exits moving into the straightaways, but that final turn as well, coming back around towards the finishing line. That is really the true test of how much speed you can maintain and how far you can push it to try and regain any sort of positioning against the racers in front of you.
Yeah, and we've seen, even through qualifying, Boquet finishing in first there. So we know he's got the speed. And really, I think this is what our qualifying kind of was, right? Boquet in first, Mitch in second, Barcode in third. So not much of a surprise. Perhaps the surprise is that they aren't in such a close and intense battle as we've seen in those previous two races, as they're content to kind of space this out, play it patient, not really have to push for too much. Or, I'm sure if you're Barcode or Mitch, you're looking for those overtakes, especially Barcode, kind of a big jump again in prize money from P3 to P2 at the end of the day. But looking at the numbers battle throughout the course of these three races, Mitch probably has crunched the numbers, knows that he just needs to hold on to P2 to kind of lock in the day. So Boquet hoping for some action behind him, but Mitch, seeing the distance between him and Barcode, really just needs to, play safe, hang tight, and let the racing run its course to lock this one in.
Nice smooth run so far from really our front three runners here. Barcode, unfortunately, is a bit too far behind to try and get in a position to contest for a higher podium finish. Miguel as well could have some opportunities to try and catch up to Barcode here, but that's going to rely on a slip up from Barcode. Speaking of which, he goes a little bit into the grass, but there's the
slip up.
A bit of drift there,
There
actually.
it is.
Good moves from Barcode to maintain it at least as he works his way around the curve, but that'll cost him a bit more time. You'll see him drop back to nearly a 5-second disadvantage behind Mitch now. So those two well in front of the rest of the pack after that kind of exchange of events from Barcode right there.
Yeah, and if you're Barcode, you're kind of thanking your lucky stars there that you were able to hang on despite the slipping. But Boquet, if you're kind of aware of that action, you're kind of hoping that Barcode can catch up to Mitch and start to battle for that P2 position, because that's really going to open the door for Boquet to potentially clinch a victory and another grand finals crowning here. But with Barcode kind of extending that because of the slipperiness of that previous action, going to be harder for him to work his way up as we reach the fifth lap here on our final race.
All clean racing so far, and really all departments here. No one needing to get too dirty to try and fight for their positioning. It's another nature of just this track and the way that the cars are panning out as well. So we'll continue to see a solid lead put forward by both Boquet and Mitch. Boquet, again, just been smooth cruising this entire time. He's sitting back there praying for someone to get in the way of Mitch, maybe bump him down a position or two, so he still has an opportunity to retake on points at the end of this circuit, but just not happening at this point due to what we're seeing from those P3 through 5 or so, not enough contention. And unfortunately, we did see Brulaire drop his P4 to Kaiser Miguel about a lap or so ago as well. So he's now had to drop back a position. Good play for Miguel to reclaim it from him and make sure that his placements are still staying consistent as well.
Yeah, we could see some pressure being applied to Barcode from Kaiser here as he continues to drive clean and catch up to this P3 position. Some other action happens towards our mid-pack. Villa again, Raptors, Brulaire, all kind of putting on a nice performance. Matt Williams, P10 right now, kind of just trying to stay above water in that mid-pack. And Barcode just continuing to hang on, just content in this P3, keeping some distance between him and Kaiser, and not really trying to contest too heavily against Mitch here, who's out in front again.
Big swing as we come back around through those final few curves here. Working our way outside of the boot into turn 11, I believe. Coming back around for that final curve where you're going to need to make sure, again, you maintain speed over everything else. That's been, I think, the big takeaway so far from here is Boquet has not missed a beat. A big improvement over what we were seeing, really more so in the first race. The second race, he had a pretty clean time there, too. But now here on our third and final circuit at Watkins Glen, we're really seeing him come into full power here and just taking complete control of not only the circuit, but the entire grid here, as he has barely been challenged for P1. But a little bit further back, P6 and 5, close contention here. Raptors tries to get aggressive on the 90, but is not going to be able to take it. He's forced back a little bit further here. That's going to be a nice defense played out by Brulaire to be able to at least keep his P5 after gaining momentum earlier in this race, and unfortunately losing P4 a couple moments ago to Miguel.
Yeah, love what we're seeing out of Brulaire, again, qualifying in person, in store through those race days activations. And, you know, previously actually in a prior season, Boquet even qualified through there, kind of skipping the online time trials portion. So, you know, it's been interesting to see how certain drivers approach those multiple ways to qualify. But for someone like Brulaire to come in through race days and put on such a clean performance, really awesome to see that in our EMEA Grand Final. And of course, we have Mitch still clean in P2, P1, 2, and 3, just keeping it clean, keeping it tight here, trying to hold out on these positions as Barcode drops back a little bit in the timing as well. So probably not going to see an overtake there unless Mitch really slips up in these final closing laps.
Indeed, it's coming down to the final 3 laps, in fact, here in just a moment, as we're about to cross into lap 8. And so very much the same storyline towards the front. Much like our previous races, though, once again, that like 6th through 9th roughly positions are going to be pretty heavily contested between each other. We got a lot of jumbling going on there. Curious to see who winds up on top of that pack, as it's been a pretty major storyline here, is who's blocking who in the mid-pack here so far throughout the EMEA finals. But once again, into full lap 8 now. No changes for our front runners, and it only seems like those two specifically are gaining more and more. Mitch, an impressive about 6.5 seconds nearly in front of Barcode at this point. So some beautiful consistency coming out of both of our front runners here in the European region.
Yeah, Boquet really kind of reaching peak performance here on this final race, and it's really just going to come down to those point totals, again factoring in those fastest lap bonus points. We'll see where the dust settles between all of these drivers. But in terms of race 3, top 3 feeling pretty solidified, but like you mentioned, continuing to battle it out in that mid and back pack as Johan trying to close the gap, make a move on Matt Williams as we check in with Barcode, who continues to hang on to P3 with Kaiser Miguel kind of flirting in and out of being able to contest that position.
The tow there continuing to give Barcode some problems. I think we saw a similar event happen a few laps back as well. That really opened up the gap between him and Mitch. A bit cleaner, working his way around the heel this time. So no continued issues, but that's obviously going to be Miguel sitting just a few feet back, just salivating, waiting for an opportunity to pass him if Barcode slips too heavily again here. But it seems like he's keeping it together at the very least. And while that lead may be shrinking, it's at least being preserved here with just 2 laps to go now.
Yeah, Kaiser again, like you mentioned, just waiting for that opportunity, seeing if Barcode slips up just enough to make a move or close that gap for our P3 position going into our final couple of laps here. We'll have to see if, again, Kaiser can make that move. Brulaire, again, sitting about 4 seconds back behind Kaiser. So this pack kind of spreading out with a few players still contesting over these positions. Mitch still kind of floating in second place, P2, enough distance between both Boquet and Barcode that he doesn't have to worry about too much other than clean racing to close out the day.
Mitch happy to be there, probably just working on trying to maintain fastest lap time at this point too, more than anything, so he can get that additional point, just make his odds that much more secure to try and wind up in overall P1 at the end of this series, and he is looking quite confident to potentially do so here with the things are looking. 1 more lap still to go though, it's still racing, anything can happen here, so we'll wait and see. Boquet, we could see that slip up that we were seeing a little bit of on the first race finally come back, but a far cry from that type of performance so far here on our 3rd and final race on Watkins Glen. Is, like I've said a few times now, he's been the picture of consistency here in this 3rd race.
Yeah, you just kind of never know what's going through their head, right? That mental game obviously playing a factor, maybe white knuckling a bit too hard. You never know what could happen, but just got to stay locked in, stay in the zone, close this one out as that finish line and final lap are ever approaching. We do have some close battles, some players still trying to work their way up into higher positions. Specifically, we see Raptors right on the heels of Brulaire. And again, Matt Williams and also Johan kind of close on that higher position to just fight their way up just a little bit more.
We'll see here if anything else will change up, specifically inside of that mid-pack, but our front runners seem very well secured at this point. Pack markers as well, pretty far paced out, so no change is going to be occurring there towards the back of the pack. It seems like overall the grid has a nice even spread among it here, and it looks like these placements more than likely will stay relatively the same heading into the final few minutes of the race here, and specifically for our front runners, the final few seconds as we enter the boot for the final time here. Mitch and Boquet still leading that charge, with Boquet again an incredibly consistent race here to finish out the EMEA finals. Just see if he's going to be able to round it back up here over these last few seconds.
Yeah, a bit of a breather for our P1, 2, and 3 after those crazy battles and intense moments we saw in race 1 and 2. They get a little bit of a breather here and just have to focus on that clean driving in our final race as the rest of the pack continues to battle. But like you had mentioned, nearing the end here, we do see a couple more battles happening towards that back and mid pack.
D'Lo going to try to push ahead here in the final few seconds, but it's only a momentary take of P8. Munz takes it right back away from him, but that race actually not finishing up just yet. Meanwhile, however, we do have P1 and P2 heading across the finish line. Boquet with a confident win here in the third and final race of our tournament. Mitch, however, right behind him in second, and with those two P1 victories from the first and second race, he's still going to be looking good to potentially lead things out. We'll figure that out in just a moment here.
Yeah, we will show you those point totals momentarily, but just kind of talking about where that race finished. Like you mentioned, Boquet able to battle back throughout the day, despite maybe a rocky race 1 and race 2. Finishes up in first, nice and clean in our third race, kind of showing off what we've come to expect from him out of our previous 2 grand finals, where he was the victor. But of course, Mitch finishing in second, Barcode in third, and then Blue, anything else kind of to touch on here? I think, Brulaire we see, but what kind of jumps out at you of our race 3 results here?
I think Brulaire really just the highlight more than anything. Matt Williams unfortunately falling down a couple of places from where we've generally seen him finishing out, but Brulaire, props to him finally pushing his way, breaking his way out of that mid-pack there behind like P6 and P7, finally able to end up with a top 5 finish. Would have liked to see the P4, but Miguel as well has been very consistent in finishing around that P4, so that was always going to be a tough challenger for him. Props for the progress that he was able to make regardless, though.
Yeah, so with those race 3 results being locked in, I think we're ready to take a look at our EMEA final standings, and it is RBM Mitch as your new G Challenge champion, toppling 2-time winner Boquet with 73 points to Boquet's 70. Barcode finishing in third, and then the rest of the grid kind of totaling their way down. But what a race between our top 3 players here today.
And a very close finish. Goes right back to what we were talking about with Mitch, kind of just fully content to hang out in P2 for that final race. He knew the points were probably going to play in his favor as long as nothing crazy happened, and he got bullied out of P2 by Barcode as soon as he was dead set ahead of him by like 5 or 6 seconds. It was more about maintaining it than anything else. So masterful play there from Mitch to have a nice smooth finish here in the final race.
Yeah, and big props to all of our drivers here in that EMEA region. Big congratulations to RBM Mitch, who is your new G Challenge champion, and Boquet. Of course, some amazing driving, some amazing battles throughout all of this top 3, including Barcode. So really an amazing region to watch, a really fun set of races, and that is just our first region here today. So we are going to throw it to a brief commercial break, and then we will be back with the rest of your G Challenge Grand Finals. So stay tuned.
The Logitech G Pro Racing wheel and pedals are equally at home on desk setups or sim rigs. Here's how to get them hooked up to your desk. Place the wheel unit on your desk and attach the clamp. You don't need to over-tighten. The Pro wheel has 11 Newton meters of direct drive torque, so we recommend using a sturdy desk. The Pro pedals have a flat back edge so you can fit them up against your wall, so there's no wandering pedals under heavy braking.
ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your Logitech McLaren G Challenge Grand Finals broadcast. We just saw some exciting races and crowned a new champion in EMEA, but we've got a couple other regions to recap for you before we get into our final NA races, and that of course is our APAC and LATAM regions. Now, we saw some quite exciting action kind of across the board throughout both of these regions, but just wanted to recap some of the highlights, show you a few of those racing moments, and of course announce our winners for those regions. So in APAC, we did see some familiar faces, some players returning, and yeah, a lot of those battles kind of happening throughout this region with returning drivers like Lags, who we've seen previously, and Creaviator. So, you know, throughout these races, again, like we had kind of highlighted, like we had mentioned before, with these cars, with these tracks, kind of an escalating difficulty, but definitely saw some exciting action with, again, you know, a lot of battling throughout those P1 and P2 positions, like you're seeing right here between Lags and Creaviator. THR also having some good representation across the board throughout these races, and a lot of that kind of jockeying for position, especially early on, as we see some, you know, aggressive driving and a lot of battles kind of happening throughout our APAC side of the G Challenge.
The storyline for Lags was very interesting too, as he had to fight for P1 finishes in the large majority of these races as well. Our second place ultimate finisher here, Creaviator, ultimately had to actually out-qualified him on a couple of these. The one we just saw there, of course, starting out with Catalunya, and then I believe for our third race, which we'll highlight in a few minutes here, he actually managed to out-qualify his opponent. So Lags having to constantly really fight for P1, but as we'll see here, still just as consistent as he was, and obviously a little bit of fun going on here too over the course of the race. A few of our players having to ghost out there a bit, but Lags, of course, already having won. I believe our previous season got that nice experience of being able to go to the McLaren Technology Center, check that out, fighting for a new prize this time of being able to go check out the Spanish GP coming up in a few months as well here. Always some fun trips on the line here at the G Challenge, and he wants to claim them, especially coming from the APAC region. That'll be quite a nice trip for him.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the awesome things between these both summer and winter seasons, is kind of the variety of experiences you can win with those first place finishes. So yeah, big ups again to these drivers. Like you mentioned, Lags really having to put in that work, and that's kind of a theme we saw throughout the EMEA as well, right? Is throughout these grids, there's a lot more battling, really having to earn those first place finishes as you know the competition throughout these grids continues to become more and more difficult, more and more competitive, as we see again Lags, like we mentioned, having to battle there throughout all of these races. And then of course the rest of the grid, similar to our EMEA region, it's really fighting for every spot, as we see more and more, again, THR representation. Love it throughout this region. And yeah, kind of throughout here in APAC, specifically on this race number 3 track car combo, keeping it a little tighter, I think, as well than we saw in EMEA. So, you know, those positions not as spread out in some of these spots, but, you know, of course, Lags able to work for those P1s, and Creaviator kind of being his nemesis rival out there on the track.
Lags, you saw, they're really only reclaiming P1 for the final track in those final few seconds as well, but he managed to take it every single time for all 3 of our races that we had here in the Grand Final Series, and that gave him a well-deserved first place finish with 77 points on the board, a staggering 10 points ahead of his second place finisher, who, again, credit to Creaviator, just as consistent there, finishing in second place in every single one of our races, just not able to take the heat from Lags, unfortunately, and he was able to get the best of him every single time, despite even in some situations seeing Creaviator qualify ahead. So nicely played by Lags for sure there, a very well-deserved first place and a very well-deserved lead there ahead of the rest of the pack too.
Yeah, and then of course going down, you know, TNR, Dez, Zach, Fem Racer, Jaden, all kind of, you know, placing in some of those higher prize pools across the board. Like we mentioned, you know, at the beginning, every single spot in our grand final is walking away with some cash. So it's not just the experience for first, but there's also that nice big prize pool that's distributed across our entire grid for every region. yeah, so shout outs to kind of everyone throughout our 4 regions, our 16 qualified drivers for kind of making this a great show, great program, and some exciting races across the board. Then, of course, not only APAC, but we did take a look at LATAM as well, where we definitely had to get the stewards involved for this region. And, you know, for what it's worth, it makes it exciting, but we definitely had some things to review. As LATAM, always an exciting region, always kind of fighting for those positions, for better, for worse at times, as we kind of take a look at our action here.
You'll notice on the grid, too, it was 2 teams primarily that took over the overall grid spacing for the grand finals here in this region. Both the RBM and Dex clans dominated those finals, holding 9 out of the 10 top spots that we'll eventually see on the scoreboard here in a few moments. But like you were alluding to there, Frank, let's check out some of the action, as we'll see the stewards had to get involved a little bit here. A much closer contended race, really on all 3 of the circuits this time around here, and we're going to see that in this replay footage as well. But still some clear leaders, and we're seeing 2 of them right now at the front of the pack on the very first race of this series between VINII and McGesney, that we're going to be trying to maintain control throughout the course of this series of 3 races.
Yeah, and even all the way at the back of the pack, you see Dex fighting it out. The battle's just as intense. If we just showed you that clip, you would probably think that they were fighting for P1 and P2 as well, which is kind of the theme of LATAM. What kind of transpired throughout our 3 races in this region was just intense battles across the board, as we see Wesley here, again, no stranger to the G Challenge, working his way up into P3. There we see another RBM driver, again, VINII and McGezen kind of going at it toe-to-toe in P1 and P2, as VINII does manage to secure a P1 in that first race. And then going on to Silverstone, we kind of mentioned some of these turns. We mentioned some of the stewards that had to get involved. And of course, race 2, no slouch when it comes to intensity either, as we see a little bit of a love tap there at the start of this race.
And that's going to continue as well, really wrapping things around the first few laps of Silverstone as everybody maintained their position. One player I wanted to highlight specifically is the one that's currently in P3 on this clip, COD Chaos, who was all over the grid. If you saw it back on our first race as well, we saw him at one point in P4. By the end of the race, he was way down in like P10 as well. So this guy was very fun to keep an eye on over the course of the finals inside of this region, as you just didn't really know what to expect from him. Always bringing that aggression, always bringing a capability to at least push himself forward. And I think on this track specifically, he does end up with a top 5 or top 4 finish, but always fun to see. Again, just a real wild card in the mix there on a 16-player grid like this.
Yeah, awesome. And then this was definitely the anyone can win region. And a big thing to call out here, of course, is in race 3, RBM VINII is going to drop all the way into P12, I believe it was, and clawed his way up that leaderboard, the timing tower. You see him in 3rd right now, and he ends up closing out race number 3 in P2. There you see more contact, more close driving, more close calls throughout this entire region, as the battles were intense and they really didn't let up until that final lap.
Nice honorable mention from Julio here as well, as we'll see some of the final segments from this final Watkin Glen circuit. He ends up actually in the top 4 for the finals here on that race specifically, and that ends up pushing him into a very nice position on our final LATAM leaderboard, which we're going to be checking out here in just a moment. VINII still very much our champion, though not as dominant of a lead as we saw out of our former region over in APAC, of course, but still a confident win with about 5 points ahead of our 2nd place finish there in McGezen.
Yeah, and really it's an RBM podium here in our LATAM region as well. So big shout outs to the team, a great day there. But like you mentioned, some great driving out of VINII, especially in that 3rd race, to claw his way through the chaos, both figuratively and literally, as there is COD Chaos in P8 to win our LATAM region and be your G Challenge champion here today. So big congratulations to him. Big shout outs to these two regions, both APAC and LATAM, for, continuing to put on a great show, allowing us to check out some amazing races. And yeah, congratulations to those winners who will again be winning that VIP experience to the Spanish Grand Prix. So with that being said, that's going to kind of cover our little recap of both APAC and LATAM. We're going to throw it to a brief commercial break again, and then we'll be back with our final North American Grand Finals. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
The Logitech G Pro Racing wheel and pedals are equally at home on desk setups or sim rigs. Here's how to get them hooked up to your desk. Place the wheel unit on your desk and attach the clamp. You don't need to over-tighten. The Pro wheel has 11 Newton meters of direct drive torque, so we recommend using a sturdy desk. The Pro pedals have a flat back edge so you can fit them up against your wall, so there's no wandering pedals under heavy braking.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your Logitech McLaren G Challenge Grand Finals broadcast. We've got one remaining region to crown a champion in here today, and that is going to be in North America. Super excited to get into this one because similar to EMEA, we have the potential of a three-time champion here coming up in ForceOne.
Very much the case. ForceOne has very much dominated this circuit previously, so we're going to see if he can go, like you said, for the three-peat this time around, re-earn that experience, and of course the cash prize that comes along with it. That's always nice as well.
Yeah, we know he can predict the weather, but is he predicting a victory here today is going to be the big one on our broadcast. So checking out race one qualifying, off to a good start, but just by a hair here in the lap time is going to be ForceOne in that first position, followed by RBM Lightning and Vettel. So looks like it'll be a pretty competitive grid here in North America.
Lightning gonna have to see if he can be a true lightning bolt, work his way past ForceOne. We were looking for a contender over in EMEA, and we managed to get one, of course, but now that test will happen here in North America. And just like our previous series, we're going to start things out over here on Catalunya as well with the 1976 McLaren. Obviously, again, that very iconic car. For those who saw the 2013 movie Rush, that was the James Hunt car in that movie for a good amount of it. So let's see how our sim racers handle it here today as we get started with the first race of North America.
All right, here we go. Final region for the day. Final winner to be crowned. And ForceOne is going to be looking for the three-peat, but all that grid behind him gunning for that spot as well. So we'll have to see how it plays out. Trying to stay kind of clean here through our first couple of turns. And it looks like for the time being, ForceOne is able to get out clean ahead of the pack.
Already a little bit of shuffling going on here as well, especially further back on the grid, of course, but now we'll wait and see if things continue to happen once more towards the front of the pack. We saw some close contention there on the very first turn, working our way through Elf. Will it be the same as we come around this wide bend here, exiting seat? Not the case necessarily, though. ForceOne still keeping himself nice and consistent at the front, already with a near 2-second lead over our P2 challenger as well. So once again, showing up with that consistency and the power we've come to expect from him from previous series.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, a lot of that shuffling going on in those little pockets as we see some drivers dropping back towards the back of these groupings, but everyone else keeping it kind of close. I know I saw some other battles between Blazian and Bowtie taking place as they exchange spots on that leaderboard. But like you kind of said, it's ForceOne sitting on a little bit of cushion here at the start, but of course, plenty of race left here in our first on the NA region.
Bit of movement there in P4. Lightning able to overtake Whiteout to be able to take control of that position. Whiteout now back down, still in the top 5, of course, but one position lower. We'll see what ringing effects that will have later on in this race. First lap completed, though clean for the most part, but like you were mentioning, some of those back markers wiping out a bit. We saw, I think, 2 of them have a spin out there and end up further back. They're going to have to see if they can recover a bit later into this race, but towards the front, it is the chase to try and catch ForceOne right now. The lead has shrunk since when we catched in on it in the mid portion of lap 1. Now can Vanquish fully close the gap and take over, with he himself having pressure right behind him from Vettel. So a very tough position that P2 is going to find himself in here, especially as we come around these next couple of curves.
Yeah, it feels like all throughout the top half of this grid, everyone in striking distance of the position, both ahead and behind. So you're going to have to see some clean and consistent driving throughout this pocket. And for the most part, ForceOne able to stay ahead of the pack and avoid most of the drama that might be occurring throughout our other drivers as they fight to work their way up. And again, you know, really wanting to set the tone here in this first race. You want to start strong, really give yourself, if anything, kind of the ability to relax and sort of focus for those upcoming races. Don't want to have to be doing math on the fly as you get into those second and third races and figure out what position you want to be in or don't want to fall into. Really just want to give yourself the best shot at finishing strong and at the podium. As we see Vanquish trying to contest, working his way up. Looks like Lightning has fallen a little bit behind, but still plenty of race left, plenty of room for him to work his way into those upper positions. Vettel as well, another driver who's been performing really well in qualifying, so we'll have to see if that can translate here to our live race.
Seldom Legacy able to take control of P7 in the last few seconds here from D-Plot. A lot of shuffling happening between P12 and P15. So the back, very much an active point here between those racers at this point as they try to take control of those higher positions with each other. Important to note, of course, that every placement matters really going into this. There's money on the line no matter where you finish. Just making it into this stage of the tournament guarantees, I believe, at least $100. And if you're able to push yourself to a higher placement, obviously it'll increase exponentially up to our top prize past that point.
Oh yeah, definitely want to fight for every position available while keeping it clean, as I did see Bowtie and Blazian again just battling back and forth, trading spots. And that kind of has been reflected in a couple of these positions throughout race number 1. Vettel still hanging on pretty solid in 4th. Movement again happening around our other players, Blazian and Bowtie, still kind of exchanging back and forth, but Vettel still trying to find that opening on Lightning, trying to find some sort of move that he can make.
Bit of a fallback here from Vettel, considering where he started the race out in P3. Lightning able to overtake him in the last, I believe, lap or so here. And Vettel now really just fighting for revenge on that front, trying to see if he can work his way back up towards P2, of course, where he'll ideally want to be landing at based on prior performances that we've seen out of him. But away from that, he will be able to take control of P3, but only for just a split second or so. Lightning battles right back for it as they work their way through the first turn on lap number 4 and continue to bump a little bit against each other here, coming around through the big swing before we enter Repsol. Looks like Vettel does take the lead, but Repsol might get the better of him here on that turn, and indeed has to cut the speed down way too heavily for that curve. Does allow for Lightning to take over, but again, Lightning can't hold on to him. Maybe he can. It's back and forth all over the place between these two drivers here as they come around through seat.
Yeah, a little bit squirrely for Vettel there at times. Feels like was able to make the moves, but really couldn't lock it in. So Lightning able to capitalize on that, regain that position. But now we know Vettel can make the move. We just have to see if he can perfect it and lock in that higher placing against Lightning as he continues to try and defend here.
Vettel once again closing in on Lightning. Will he make yet another move against him? Cuts in very narrowly there, coming back around through that last turn to be able to try and take it away from him. Won't be able to claim it just yet, as Lightning's doing a great job with the defense at this point of P3, keeping Vettel off his tail. And again, Vettel getting so aggressive here. Will have to be cautious of this. Will be burning away a little bit of tire wear as a result of him trying to fight so aggressively. So we'll only have kind of limited life to race like this, but the pressure's still on. It still seems to be somewhat working to close the gap versus Lightning. So he's going to keep that pace going forward on the long straight past the finish line. He will temporarily retake it, but for how long? Does he have enough power to close that gap now coming into Elf? And unfortunately, no, once again, same turn as the last lap too. Lightning cuts him off one more time, continuously denying P3 for Vettel.
Lightning proving that he can strike twice against Vettel here. Well played to both of these drivers. And then, of course, throughout the grid, lots of other players working their way up. I've seen Ascari trying to fight against Whiteout, but there Vettel is able to get ahead slightly. And now the question that begs to be answered is, can he maintain this positioning?
Once again, seems to finally be gaining that slight edge over Lightning, opening up the gap to, at least for now, a safe distance between him and his opponent. But a little bit of sand running there, going to slow him down once again. Cuts off the track, though. Nice defensive maneuvering. Keeps Lightning away from P3, at least for now. But keep in mind, again, lower speed here at this point for Vettel. Surely, though, Lightning, with how closely he's been following behind, might have been affected by this. A soft cutoff there as well from Vettel once again as they work their way around one of these crucial turns, working their way up to Bonk Sabadell. And oh no, Lightning a little bit squirrely there too, but still has the inside lane. Vettel again cuts it off, though, prevents a pass at this stage here on lap 5.
I mean, well played by Lightning, just regaining control there. Could have ended in disaster for him, but Vettel continues to do a great job of just closing that door on all the moves Lightning continues to try and make, as we are halfway through our first race in North America. The battle between Vettel and Lightning rages on.
And continues to go as well. Neither one of these drivers seems to be able to get the edge over the other, at least for a longer period of time. Lightning gets the pass once again as we work our way around Renault and working up, of course, towards Repsol. Another big swing going to be having to come in here from both of these drivers. Vettel, unfortunately, just tired of this at this point. Just bumps right into his opponent in front of him. Sees if he can maybe force something out of Lightning. Won't end up happening this time around, however. And up towards our next turn, could see an opportunity here, but Vettel has been forced back, I think in part due to that bump. Slows him down quite a bit. It does lock in those positions for now.
Yeah, Vettel still hot on his tail. Throughout the grid, a lot of players in a similar position. Ascari, right behind Whiteout. I believe Deerplot also, right behind his opponent that he's been battling with. And there's several of those throughout the grid, but of course, ForceOne sitting comfortably in first at this point as Vanquish, Lightning, and Vettel all trail decently behind him.
Fighting so hard for this P3. You were mentioning it there. ForceOne pretty safe. Vanquish also incredibly safe in P2 at this point because of all the shenanigans that's been going on between Lightning and Vettel. They have not been able to focus on their own speed here, so that's given him a pretty safe distance to kind of hold on to P2 for the foreseeable future here as well. Midpoint, a lot of close contenders happening there as well, so could still see some shifting as they go through that last part of lap number 6, but the rest of our drivers now entering lap 7 here, and Vettel still right on the tail of Lightning, trying to take things away from him. Will we see another shift, or is Lightning finally starting to surge ahead here a little bit? The next turn is certainly going to give us the next piece of that story, however, as we do see Vettel coming in, a stronger exit from the previous turn, getting right behind Lightning, wants to see if he can go wide on this one, whereas Lightning is going to dig in there, but not a wide enough angle there for Vettel to be able to overtake. Unfortunately, at this point, he still sticks behind, locked into P4 still.
Yep, not enough for Vettel to make that move, but like we mentioned, it's ForceOne out in front of the pack, just putting in laps at this point. Doesn't have to worry about much other than just keeping these laps clean and closing this one out ahead of the pack. Similarly, Vanquish in P2. Kind of relax just a little bit, focus on good, clean driving, and let everyone else duke it out behind him. Lightning and then Vettel and Whiteout again. Some distance between Vettel and Whiteout, so Vettel doesn't have to worry too much about any pressure from behind, but it is all about making this move out front.
ForceOne continuing to do good work up on front, really just trying to claim that extra point for fastest lap, as he has the leader's privilege of, well, not being challenged at this point. So obviously we'll have quite a bit of free range to focus on his line, focus on improving the lead he already has, even just over Vanquish in P2 by a solid 4 seconds or so. But here we go. Once again, the action continuing to heat up between Lightning and Vettel. Vettel's momentarily overtaking. Can he cut off Lightning from a nice exit from Elf here? Looks like he'll certainly try to do that. Maintains it, but coming around once again, he's going to have a weird entry into Renault, so his speed coming up onto Repsol may still be a bit of a problem here. With that said, Lightning seems to have fallen back quite a bit this time around, so Vettel looks like he might be holding on to P3 for at least a little bit longer here.
We also see Deer Plot, Blazion, and Bowtie fighting it out towards the back of this group. Also engaged in an intense battle of their own. But up top, towards that podium, it is an all-out war being waged for P3 at this point.
Vettel just trying to hold on here against Lightning, but Lightning definitely having the smoother exit coming up around that previous turn. They enter one of the harsher ones here on Catalunya. That is going to give an opportunity to Lightning. Vettel will be swerved off to the side a tad as well, slowing him down even further. Lightning retaking again with only 2 laps to go. These racers can only exchange positions so many more times. It's hard to tell who's going to end up on top at the end of things, really, but this is the battle to focus on right now.
Great job from Lightning there, kind of closing the door on that corner. Looked a little shaky, but was able to recover and close that window that Vettel was looking to keep open. And that's just going to make Vettel have to battle even harder as we near the end of our first race, seeing what Vettel can do. The mental side too, being engaged in a battle for this long, you've really got to focus, lock in, and really try to minimize those mistakes if you're wanting to get this move done.
It's really fun to watch this too, because Vettel seems to clearly have a slight edge over Lightning as we get towards the long straight past the finish line, and it's really just the method of capitalizing on that as much as possible, working through that first and second turn and then trying to stay ahead, as Lightning seems to have the edge in this more trickier part of the track where the turns are key to staying ahead here at this point, and we have these shorter straightaways that follow it. Such a fun dynamic to follow. Vettel going into the sand a little bit, doesn't end up affecting his momentum too much though from what we were able to see. Still right on the heels of Lightning, may have potentially lost momentum that could have been used for an overtake, however, and that's going to keep him locked into P4 as we work our way through those final key turns before we end up crossing the line again for our final lap.
I think Lightning able to predict the moves Vettel's trying to make at this point. Nice job getting on that break, closing down that inside line and really making Vettel have to get creative if he wants to find an overtake here.
This is where Vettel, look at it though, the exit from going into the final turn is going to look, at least at the start, quite a bit better from him. Some slight swerving on the front wheels as well there for Lightning. That could turn into something on this very long straight. Looks like it might be here in just a moment. Vettel crosses it again. Not a lot of brake zone left for these two. However, Vanquish may become an unwilling participant in this fight between these two in a moment, but thankfully he's still got a bit of an edge going into Elf and working our way around Renault. Vettel's got it yet again, but can he keep it now? Like I said before, this is Lightning's expertise on the track. These areas that require a bit more precision in maneuvering around these turns. That's where Vettel has been traditionally losing the lead here, and he's fighting so hard to keep it against Lightning. Once again, Vanquish soars ahead as a result of this slowdown, and you can see it, Lightning just biting at the heels there of Vettel, trying to steal away P3 and keep it towards the end of the track.
And Vanquish also doing his best not to become a third party in this battle, doesn't want to be involved in any of this action, trying to stay out ahead as Lightning able to make another move to sneak past Vettel.
Lightning just bullying Vettel out, even struggling a little bit as he recovers, coming around that turn as well. Wrapping around the final few, it is going to be Vettel biting at his heels again. And while he might be able to gain that slight momentum bonus going around to the finish line, you can see where the actual line is on the map. And generally speaking, he's not been able to gain enough speed to pass Lightning at that point. So I think Lightning's done it, ladies and gentlemen. I think he has locked in P3, despite the tremendous effort from Vettel. We'll see it in just a second here as they wrap back around. But that will still lock in ForceOne, P1. Vanquish will get P2. And across the finish line, it is going to be Lightning that locks in P3. Very well played by both of them, however, having such a competitive race.
Yeah, just a crazy intense battle between both of those drivers through what feels like all 10 laps of that first race.
Yeah.
That was pretty much nonstop action between those two drivers and the rest of the grid. You know, some battles back and forth as well, but nothing quite as intense as what we saw between those two. So looking at our race number 1 results here in North America, it is going to be ForceOne finishing in first, Vanquish in second. Lightning is able to secure podium with that third place finish, and Vettel is going to lock in fourth, with the rest of the grid falling in behind. But with the kind of action that we saw between Lightning and Vettel here in NA, it looks like it might be an exciting region if we continue to see those battles throughout the rest of these races. So with race 1 now being in the books, we are gonna go ahead and throw it to a brief commercial break, and then we'll be back with race 2 in North America. So stay tuned.
The Logitech G Pro Racing wheel and pedals are equally at home on desk setups or sim rigs. Here's how to get them hooked up to your desk. Place the wheel unit on your desk and attach the clamp. You don't need to over-tighten. The Pro wheel has 11 Newton meters of direct drive torque, so we recommend using a sturdy desk. The Pro pedals have a flat back edge so you can fit them up against your wall, so there's no wandering pedals.
ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your Logitech McLaren G Challenge Grand Finals. We're getting into our final race here for the day in North America, and we will be crowning our final champion as well. So super excited to get into this one. So let's go ahead and hop into our qualifying going into race number 3. And really no surprise here, SDW ForceOne once again sitting on top of a leaderboard.
Absolutely the case. Vettel right behind him as well, so no real surprises in seeing those first two starting out pretty much right where they've been the entire time throughout this series. Vanquish will be interesting to see what he does. I believe he was a little bit further back in race number 2, so time to see if he can put the pressure onto players like Vettel now, having that closer proximity to him at the front of the grid this time.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get into our third and final race in NA and our final race of the day. Once again, kind of liking the progression of cars and tracks that we've seen here out on the grid, everything becoming a little bit more challenging. And, despite the region, it's always interesting to see how different drivers are able to accommodate these different car and track combos. But it looks like SDW ForceOne, despite some early positioning from Lightning and Vanquish, is going to be out in first pretty safely, at least for the time being.
Actually, Vanquish and Lightning getting a little bit behind each other there as well, so they'll be engaged in their own a little back and forth for a bit here as they fight for P3 and P4. Could set up conditions that would be very similar to what we saw back in race number 2 as well here, so time to keep up with that, see if that's going to remain the case, although Lightning coming up very close, bit of a traffic jam as we work around the corner for this one, trying to see if they're going to be able to keep things together as they wrap forward to round out the boot portion, I should say, of lap number 1 here. But still very much ForceOne in the lead, not slowing down a single second here. Lightning, though, like I said before, very close on both of their heels as we start to enter the boot.
Yeah, Vettel, Lightning, Whiteout, Vanquish, Legacy, all of these drivers kind of have been, at each other's heels in one position or another throughout these races here today. But really the one thing is ForceOne out in front of the pack. So Vettel, again, like we mentioned, despite that race 1 performance, has been also pretty solid in second, but all that action kind of taking place throughout the rest of the grid. And RBM Lightning, SDW Whiteout, and JSR Vanquish all trying to lock into those positions. A little bit more distance here than we saw in the previous race, but of course we have seen that change at any moment, so we'll have to keep our eye out for any of that action.
Now, Lightning, he's been setting up a move here for quite some time. Where is he finally going to strike? This might be it right here, and indeed, late braking window for him, but he cuts right into Vettel's line, and Vettel just pushes him right out of the way like a snowplow. Attempt at taking away positioning there is going to fail outright, but good for Lightning. He recovers very quickly, all things considered, and ends up still in P3 at the end of the day, just well behind his 2 competitors further up the field from him now.
Yeah, could have turned out way worse, with all that contact, basically just cutting right in front there. So despite that contact, is able to recover, but now we have Whiteout again back behind Lightning, and Vanquish not far behind him as well. So with all that action, it kind of gives a couple drivers behind you room to maneuver, plan out another attack. We'll have to see if that continues throughout this third and final race. But of course, want to keep highlighting that ForceOne is out in the lead, but SDW Vettel is definitely closer here than we saw in that previous race. So we'll see if he starts to contest our leader at all.
Vanquish also having a pretty interesting arc this race so far as well, starting out I believe around 3rd or 4th in his qualification, has dropped quite a bit down to 5th, but you can see, and it was actually a bit lower than that as well about a lap or 2 ago, but as you can see is fighting for every single one of those positions he lost and is working his way back into it. Whiteout, as we just saw, being his most recent victim, swinging right past him. Whiteout basically no power to stop that whatsoever, just falters back and lets Vanquish run away with it as both racers work their way out of the boot and into 2 of the final turns here on lap 2.
Yeah, some other players to kind of call out that we've seen in the mix in that action. SDW, Ascari, Bowtie, Bladesian, all back there, 7th through 9th, kind of hanging out, working their way up, trying to just solidify those positions on that leaderboard. Because, of course, like we mentioned, each position, all positions on the grid are going to be walking away with some prize money, but each position you kind of gain equates to a little bit more cash at the end of the day, which I think has led to, some really fun battles even in that mid-pack where everyone is still trying to work their way up the timing tower.
Props to all of our drivers, of course, just for making it this far to those grand finals. So definitely going to be rewarding them with something to walk away from at least. But this is still actually a very tight grid for the most part here. Just looking at it all across the board, no one with a resounding lead greater than a second or two at the absolute most, safe for the very, very back of it. So ForceOne having to fight a little bit harder to maintain his P1 this time. No one directly contesting his position as of yet. Vettel's been a good guardian of that, all things considered, just behind him. But still, Lightning and the rest of that crew still trying to push things. Bladesian as well here, still trying to find a path against Bowtie as he's a little squirrely coming around that first boot heel, but is not going to be able to contest it too much and actually loses a lot of his speed in the process too, so opens up a window for Deerplot to at least try and take positioning away from Bladesian. And will he get it? It's very close. This next turn is going to decide it as they both wrap their way out of the boot. Bladesian gets aggressive, cuts off positioning for Deerplot, and is going to be able to hold for now.
Love seeing some of these great battles even towards the back of the group. We had mentioned Deerplot in that previous race with some of those moves he was making, so great to see that that's continuing here into our third race on Watkins Glen. Of course, jumping back up into our pole positions, it continues to be ForceOne out in front. Vettel trying to close the gap a little bit at a steady pace, but not really in striking distance just yet. And then a bit of a mirror of our previous race where P3 kind of drops back a little bit out of that position, and there's kind of its own battle waging in that P3 through P5 and 6 even position.
Pivotal junction here as our players work their way through things here, trying to keep themselves in play as they try to push past that inner loop. Always have to be careful of how you navigate it, especially if you're close proximity to another driver, of course. That is going to test your capability to navigate at high speeds, potentially a little bit of high-speed braking too, which can always make your car a bit squirrely, especially the P1 here. So perhaps to all our drivers for making it through cleanly this time around. And as we head once again into the boot, pushing our way past the toe, will anyone be able to use this nice long curve, and more importantly, the exit from said curve, as an opportunity to shoot up ahead of any of their competitors? Not looking like it at this point, though. That grid staying nice and stable as we work our way through the fourth lap.
We do see Vanquish and Lightning close back and forth, maybe moving back and forth through those positions. We also have Legacy back here, trying to close the gap on Ascari as we go into this turn. Can a move be made? We'll have to find out, as again, towards the top, things kind of start to settle in. Definitely less aggressive, maybe a little less or a little more reserved, I guess I should say, than what we saw in our previous race. But for the most part, players still looking to make those moves when available, but maybe making them a little bit more patient here on Watkins Glen.
Vanquish quietly has worked his way back into the top three, however, here, having to get a start actually in a very similar position. He was either P3 or P4 at the very beginning of this race through qualifying, and then had to fall way back towards like P6 and has been able to reclaim all three of those positions in the meanwhile. Bit of a sad story here for Vanquish, unfortunately, as we're going to see Lightning run right up past him. If he didn't catch it, Vanquish went into the sand for just a split second there, but it leads into a very big straight, so it cost him huge on speed retention. And that's how we're going to be able to see Lightning now soar right past him once again.
Yeah, really like what I'm seeing from Lightning overall as well. Had some unfortunate circumstances in some of those previous races, but I think across the board, really the concentration and resolve of a lot of these drivers, able to shake certain things off and then make the move in those following laps or even following races is really always great to see, as Lightning now might be looking to try to catch up to Vettel when applicable. But of course, it is ForceOne really being the story of the day here in our North American region. the most consistent driver I think we've seen on the day in both qualifying and in finishes. And so far, again, in our final race, content just sitting in the lead.
In some ways, it's Air Force One with how quickly he's able to work his way through to the front of the pack there. So once again, massive props to him for just the consistent level of performance that we've been seeing out of Force One throughout this entire series so far. All falls to really if he makes a mistake. That seems at least to be the only thing that could knock him out of P1 at this point, and that puts the pressure back on players like Vettel to kind of improve their own line to be able to finally close in on Force One's consistency. Going to see if anything else shakes up a little bit deeper into the grid, however, as we go into lap 6 here, past the halfway point. Who still has a chance to make their impact? Vanquish definitely one to keep an eye on, as he's recently lost some positioning to Lightning, but Lightning just as well, now nearly a second ahead of him, so still seeing a lot more to be gained here from P3 than P4 necessarily.
Yeah, Lightning, Vanquish, and Whiteout always kind of feel like our powder keg in these races where if they're grouped up, you never know quite what's about to happen. I think thankfully in this third race, there's a little more distance between these three drivers, so the action not as intense, at least for the time being. We'll have to see if someone's able to make up some of that distance as we jump on board with Ascari here, who's also looking to climb his way up a couple of these positions.
It's a very technical turn that they'll work their way into there, the toe of the boot that they work their way uphill towards and then swings back around. Bit of a complex curve to exit it there as you work your way around the heel. And that's all, again, about, like we talked about at the beginning of this broadcast, speed retention coming through those final couple of turns. The big straight, as it would often be on other tracks, here to go past the finishing line is not as big on this track as you might see on some of our others. Catalunya being the biggest contrast to that, of course. You don't have as much capability to just run away. It's all about how quickly you can get out from this final turn here that we're seeing our leaders go past now. That is where you can gain a lot more kind of speed against your opponents directly in front of you and potentially close the gap to overtake towards the 90 or the turn following that.
Yeah, just really like, across the board, across the regions, what we've been seeing out of our drivers here today, with the G Challenge taking place with qualifying both either in race days or in that Rivals playlist in Forza. Early on, we kind of saw some really fast drivers, but maybe when they got out on the grid, you would see some of those nerves start to peek through, or maybe even inexperience in some cases. But now that we're about 3 seasons deep into the Forza G Challenge series, you're really seeing a lot more technical driving in a live racing environment coming into play. I think it's made for just a lot of excitement across the board as either drivers become more familiar with the game, with driving in these high-pressure situations, or even some of those rivalries start to develop between players. All of it makes for more and more exciting races like we've kind of seen throughout the course of today.
And Lightning here, you see a little slip-up from Vettel. We'll see if Lightning's able to capitalize on that now. May appear very minute in how it affects Vettel, but coming up on this next turn, that could be an opportunity for him to potentially take things over here. That gap now down from a half second to 0.4 here, so an opportunity potentially lurking for Lightning to close in, waiting to see if he's actually going to be able to take it, and he certainly wants to as we wrap out of the boot and work our way towards the final couple of turns. No capability to immediately take it just yet, but he is making progress, putting that additional pressure onto Vettel. We cannot see that heartbreaker moment that we saw back on our first race on Catalunya as well, trying to avoid it as best as he can. That's going to start to slow him down as well, meaning once again, Force One will be the real winner out of all this situation as he gets that much further ahead. And there it is, Lightning finally able to eclipse Vettel out and steal away P2.
Nice. All of that hard work paying off here in the final race as Lightning completes the overtake on Vettel, but all that action not quite finished as even towards the middle of the pack, we've got Seldom Legacy hot on the trail of Whiteout, seeing if he can find the room for this overtake and the speed as well.
Is he going to be able to take it into the corner, though, and just completely cuts off Whiteout to make it? Nicely raced by Seldom Legacy. Has to go slightly off the track, it looks like, potentially there, too, in order to make it work. But he keeps it actually well under control despite those conditions. Good on-the-fly racing from him there to be able to maintain that control and take positioning away from his opponent directly behind him there. That fight, however, between Vettel and Lightning does not appear to have finished just as of yet. Only about a tenth of a second splitting the difference between the two of them, as Vettel desperately is trying to reclaim P2 yet again.
Yeah, and the real winner here again, ForceOne, as he gets to create more and more distance as these battles wage on right behind him.
Looking like a high potential for a three-peat victory coming in here for ForceOne, unless anything crazy shakes up with his personal driving here due to Vettel and Lightning having to kind of hold back and duke it out between the two of them. Vanquish a little bit further behind, but a solid 2.5 second gap will be quite tough unless there's a spin out here for him to eclipse either of those two. Those positions will be expected to maintain consistency. However, Vettel swinging around the final turn before we cross the finish line there as well. He is going to be able to battle back, gets P2 away from Lightning, and Lightning really seemingly falling behind on that smaller straightaway there. I want to see a better picture of it now as we start to wrap back around the 90, and no, not really able to regain a lot of that positioning. Lightning losing a lot of speed there in those final few turns coming out from the boot, and he loses P2 in a very similar way to how Vettel lost it a few laps back.
Yeah, just kind of trading blows back and forth there in similar spots around that track, and we'll see if Lightning is able to make another move as we near the end of our third and final race here on the day. Lightning trying to close that gap, kicking up a little dust, seeing if another move can be made on Vettel.
Further back on the field, of course, some more of our drivers still trying to gain additional positioning, those few extra points, trying to see if they can bump up their prizing another stage or two here by sneaking in a few extra points on Watkins Glen, but it's all going to come down to that final lap starting in just a little bit here. Front runners are working their way through the boot on lap 9, however. Lightning still trying to catch up to Vettel now. It's very much a cat and mouse game between those two. Vanquish is reducing the time between him and Lightning as well. Some of this slowdown may finally come back to bite players like Vettel, as this could get a little nasty here in the final race if he's able to fully close that gap. But really, this is our big contender at this point, is if we're going to be able to see one of these two eclipse the other, potentially shake up our P2 finish, which consistently was looking to be Vettel, but he also had a slight mistake on our first track that cost him that as well.
Yep, ForceOne still out ahead, and like you mentioned, kind of our two drivers who are in striking distance would be Vanquish. It looks like Whiteout as well, in the perfect position to try to make a move here going into our final lap and secure just a couple of those extra points to try to bump their way up in those final standings and walk away with a little extra prize money as we are back on board with Lightning, who is not letting up on this fight for second against Vettel.
Rest of the grid is looking pretty solidified at this point, too, just looking at the distances there on the timing tower. So doubt we'll see anything shake up further back. It's really just this question now between Vettel and Lightning in terms of who wins it out. And obviously, if ForceOne continues to be as consistent as he always been to cross the finish line in P1 yet again for a three-peat to take an absolute dominating victory here at the NA Finals of the G Challenge this time around.
Yeah, what I'm interested really in seeing now is whether or not it's a clean sweep or a perfect day for ForceOne. How many of those fastest lap points was he also able to really secure? Like, how many points out of our total did he kind of go with here today? How dominant was this performance? Because we've seen him finish in first in all these races, but also, how many fastest laps was he able to nab as well?
A little maneuvering here from Vanquish, of all players, as well. Storming in, we mentioned that there was a slight possibility he might be able to creep up onto Vettel as well as Lightning, and he's certainly done so. Vettel will be very happy about these turn of events because he can focus on just finally escaping away from Lightning, and it seems like Vanquish may be able to do that as well, stealing P3 away out of absolutely nowhere. ForceOne will confidently cross the finish line in P1 yet again, however, and it seems like the worst possible outcome here for Lightning lightning, as out of absolutely nowhere, Vanquish also storms up and steals away P3 to end this race.
Yeah, great moves in those final moments by Vanquish, but really it was all about ForceOne in the first, second, and now third and final race. Coming in first here, and then of course, like we mentioned, Vettel coming in second, Vanquish in third, and then RBM Lightning with those final moves occurring is going to finish race number 3 in fourth. So that means with that third and final race being complete, we're able to take a look at NA's final standings. And Blue, some quick maths here. ForceOne 1 point away from the perfect day. So missed one fastest lap point that was available on the board. So about as perfect can be for ForceOne as he secures another G Challenge Grand Final. But Blue, any final thoughts on our NA field here?
Just massive props to ForceOne for the dominating field he's been showing us, not just this season, but the previous seasons as well, showing that he is the one and only here in North America, as far as this sim is concerned, at least, to take the challenge. That's going to be the question for next season now, is will anyone be able to step up to the plate? Will Vettel improve his times, potentially, to finally steal that away from him? As, obviously, props to Vettel as well for a solid second-place finish, and Vanquish as well, closing things down there in third place by sneaking forward a nice finish there in the third race versus Lightning.
Yeah, and you can see how close the rest of the grid was, kind of all the way down in points. So, you know, really kind of displaying how important some of those little battles are towards even the middle and back of the grid when it comes to those final standings. But with North America being wrapped up and ForceOne being your 3-time champion, that means we are ready to close out the day here, but not, of course, before congratulating all of our regional winners. So throughout the day, again, shout outs to RBM Mitch, THR Lags, RBM VINII, and then of course SDW ForceOne wrapping up the NA region. There are your podium finishes for the day, and that's going to do it for this season of our Logitech McLaren G Challenge Grand Finals. Of course, big shout outs to McLaren, Forza Motorsport, and Logitech G for making all of this possible. But from us here on the desk, I think that's gonna do it here today, and we'll see you all next time.